you. Good morning once again, and welcome to the 227th episode, a second time today, because the first time we had a connectivity issue, and now we're recording the session so that we can stream it a little bit later this morning. Thank you very much for your patience and for forgiving us for what happened this morning. We hope that this recording, when we stream it, will be as helpful and informative and crispy as you expected it to be. And Timothy, this is up to you now.
A second more, just a second try at this. So I apologize for that. I'm reporting from inside the cabin of the good ship Grimm's. Sometimes we have connectivity issues, and we just experienced one now. So I had to go out on the deck and fix the iPhone and come back down. So I'm a little bit damp from that, and I apologize once again for this snafu. It happens from time to time, but this is the worst time. Plus, it happened today on June 15th, the middle of the month, a really critical briefing for our audience, and I want to get right into that. So I apologize once again. You'll have to pick this up as we stream it later, and let's get right to it. So today, on Friday, the yen closed out at 144.11 to the dollar. This was following last week's 143. So it strengthened a little bit, and the markets closed after the bombings of Israel in Iran. So there was some strengthening of the yen, and I'd like to get into that later, but just for the tee off, the yen closed out at 144, a little bit stronger than it did last week. And with the tension in the Middle East going on, as a safe haven, the yen typically strengthens. So we'll be taking a look at that. The prime minister had a very busy diplomatic calendar this last week. He had maybe 3 summits. He had 4 heads of state that visited him. And last week was a little bit, or 2 weeks ago was a little bit quiet, as we reported here. This week was a little bit more hefty. He had a couple of presidents that visited him. He has to give them his full attention, especially if it's going to be something like a summit meeting. So I'd like to get into that a little bit more later in the briefing. Also, next week, he's got the summit. He's actually left for the summit, the G7 summit. He talked with President Trump this week to talk about the tariffs, to talk about trade, and to talk about meeting on the sidelines of G7. We already anticipated that, but they had a conversation on Thursday to discuss that at the same time that Mr. Akazawa was leaving for Washington, D.C. to continue his tariff negotiations that are going to be going on at the same time. Domestically, rice continues to be a hot button issue. Mr. Koizumi, once again, is really a genius pick from the prime minister to replace the outgoing Minister of Agriculture. And immediately, Mr. Koizumi focused on rice and made tremendous strides on releasing stockpiles and lowering the price, thereby enhancing the favorability of the LDP in moving forward on issues that are important to Japanese consumers. The bond market also continues to get his attention, as does fiscal policy. The Diet closes this week on Sunday. It closes. It's the same day that the election for the Tokyo Metropolitan Government occurs. But he's trying to set the stage for the manifesto for the LDP in the upper house elections and potentially the lower house elections, but it doesn't look so likely now. For talking about the bond market, about labor, about the yen, about a lot of different things that will go into the manifesto that all of the candidates in the upper house election will be singing to complement the LDP and what the LDP is going to be doing. He's giving money away, that sort of thing. Let me see. The rise in the average income, he's made a pronouncement that he wants it to go up 50% by 2040, and he wants GDP to increase by almost 40%. This is huge. The double election, will it occur or not? We're going to find out this week. This is the week to make it or break it. If it happens, that means that the opposition party needs to get together and form a no confidence motion by the end of this Diet session. If they don't, or even if they do, the prime minister said, if you begin to form a no confidence motion, I'm going to preempt you by closing down the House. I'm going to take that power as prime minister and take that wind away from you. We'll find that out all this week. The Tokyo Metropolitan elections start this week, as I spoke early. earlier, the billboards went up on Friday. So the 9-day campaign started on Friday. Faces began to appear on the billboards on Friday, and they will stay up there until Election Day. Election is on Sunday. 127 seats. There are 295 candidates. It's going to be very noisy because each candidate can have their own sound truck. And so one of the ways to get out and get the word out about their candidacy is by talking through a bullhorn and telling people as they drive through the neighborhoods. Japan reacted negatively towards Israel about the strikes that occurred on Friday. It urges restraint. Japan's expo in Osaka is in its second month. There are 6 months left to it. It's suffering from long lines. So apparently the moving of people has not quite worked as well. They maybe should have studied something from Universal Studios or from Disneyland, but apparently there is a little bit of stoppage there, and they haven't even reached their peak. And interestingly enough, President Trump approved the U.S. steel deal with a couple of caveats, but that is pretty big news if you're in that market. Back to you, Maya.
Yes, okay, thank you very much for this. And I'm looking forward to hearing the details, actually. And to everybody who is listening to this recording now while it is streaming. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thank you for your patience. Once again, apologies for the connectivity glitch earlier this morning. And we are here once again with Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Esquire, the longest standing government relations consulting firm in Tokyo. And with me as a host, Maya Matsuoka. So you can also see the names of the companies we represent here. Langley Esquire once again, and Japan Expert Insights. Japan Expert Insights actually is specializing in intercultural consulting, and we do consulting for corporate clients and also expatriates here in Japan. And well, Timothy, I just want to turn it once again over to you, and let's dive into the details.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let's get to the yen right away. The yen closed out at 144.11. It was about a 5% increase from last week, but over the week it weakened. And so the fact that Israel bombed Iran actually strengthened the yen about 0.5%. It didn't have a lot of time to take before the markets closed, but over the last week it was actually down 1%. So the fact that there is international tension in the Mideast, that there's a threat to the oil supply, it actually forces foreign money into the safe havens. The United States dollar is a safe haven, and the Japanese yen is a safe haven. So there are a couple of issues that are also in the background. U.S.-China trade negotiations they haven't quite stalled, but they're rather tepid. China is holding back on rare earths, and so they haven't had a complete clean deal. They're moving towards it, but not enough to actually affect the market. The U.S. Fed and the Bank of Japan are also discussing their policy divergences, with the Japanese Bank of Japan urging for looser money, and the Fed tightening up restrictions and their interest rate. So this will shape trade negotiations, not just with regard to the yen dollar rate, but also with the Trump negotiations and the tariffs too. It will be something that will be considered there. The Treasury Secretary is in Canada as well, and I believe Mr. Akazawa will be negotiating with his team in Washington, D.C. at the same time that the president is in Canada. Next week, the BOJ has a meeting early this month. So typically the Bank of Japan has their meeting towards the end, the last maybe Thursday of every month. It's in the middle of the month on Tuesday of this week, rather quick. And so there'll be a lot of news that comes out of that. We'll be watching that carefully, and the markets react to that because it's only once a month where they actually talk about what they've done in the past month and what they plan to do going forward. The Fed also has a decision on the 18th, which is Wednesday, and these two meetings could be somewhat pivotal in driving the yen discussions. Oil prices actually have surged 10% over the last couple of days, as you might have expected. This creates fears of stagnation, particularly here in Japan, since Japan is importing a lot of oil. and the oil is calibrated in U.S. dollars. So the Japanese have to purchase U.S. dollars in order to make those purchases. Let me see. On Friday, the United States Consumer Price Index and the PPI for industrial production will be released, and as well, Japan will release its trade balance report on Thursday, and these might trigger sharp movements in the yen. So this time next week, we're going to talk first off about what the yen-dollar ratio is and why it's like that. And those are the key notes that you need to pay attention to on Thursday and Friday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week. So just to tee that up for you. The Prime Minister had a very busy diplomatic week, as he almost always does, except 2 weeks ago. He kind of backed off of that. But on Monday, he had a summit with President Nassau from Lithuania, talking about security and the rule of law. So the Japanese always want to be forefront on discussing rule of law and how they can participate in that, because militarily they don't have much throw weight. They're in a defensive posture, and they have the United States to supplement them on an offensive or potentially offensive platform. But mostly they're working on diplomacy, on trade, on being a negotiator for countries that are having a conflict, although they have a conflict with North Korea and also potentially with China, although China is their number one trading partner. So it's a very complicated scenario there. He also had on Tuesday, President De Leon of Guatemala, a summit there. It was in the Prime Minister's office. You know, when you have a summit meeting, the embassy works on that. They work on it for a long time. They negotiate. They try and get a summit with the Prime Minister. It's awful difficult to do. I've had clients come in and say, Mr. Langley, I hear you're a big shot. I want my boss to meet the Prime Minister. Can you arrange that for us? And that's a very big deal. That's a big ask. Even countries have difficulty arranging it. So Guatemala had their summit meeting. It was in the Prime Minister's office. It wasn't full of all sorts of fanfare. It wasn't a state visit, as you might expect, but those are very few and far between these days. Plus, there's an awful lot going on. There was also a Thursday night call between Trump and Ishiba discussing the Middle East tensions, tariffs, and they agreed to discuss and meet at the G7 summit in Alberta, Canada, that starts today. Today, tomorrow, and Tuesday is the G7. So you'll start hearing a lot of news coming out about that. One of the things that they were gearing towards is making some sort of a resolution to Trump tariffs before the deadline where the pause of the implementation of the tariffs on July 9th would happen. So I'm not quite sure. I don't see the tea leaves aligning that way, that there will be a deal, but everybody has been gearing up towards that. I don't think it'll happen. I think, in fact, what is more likely to happen is that they will bypass it. It'll be tough negotiations. And before July 9th, the Prime Minister will potentially go to Washington, D.C. to sign a deal, or alternatively, the president could be coming to Japan. There is an invitation to the president and to J.D. Vance, the vice president, to come visit the expo. There is anticipation that potentially on July 9th, there will be a visit, but there's a lot of drama and ballet that goes on here. So let's wait and see. The Prime Minister also spoke with the newly appointed president of South Korea, Mr. Lee Jae-myung, on a telephone call to enhance trilateral coordination. So one of the dangers for a new prime minister or a new president of South Korea was this trilateral relationship, Japan, South Korea, and the United States. And since the new president is not a conservative, he's more of a progressive, the fear is that this trilateral relationship is going to suffer, and that the administration is going to be leaning more towards the North Korean view of things and joining forces and being one nation once again, that sort of thing, to diminish those tensions. So a lot is waited to be seen, but it looks like they will be meeting at some time in the very near future. Next week, the Prime Minister will have a G7 summit throughout the first half of the week, And let me see what else is going on with the summit. When the prime minister comes back, normally it happens when Mr. Akazawa visits the United States, he comes back and he meets with the prime minister and reports to him immediately. Similarly, the prime minister is in the G7 summit. When he comes back, he reports, first of all, to the LDP party leaders. So they'll have a big meeting there, potentially in the prime minister's office, not in the LDP, but all of the LDP will gather. And then he needs to report to his diet members too. So there might be some sort of a budget committee meeting or a presentation in the full diet within the week. And we expect a lot going on there to come out of G7. And that means that the prime minister will come in and he'll report and he'll try and gain consensus with other party leaders before they make some sort of a pronouncement. So as I said earlier, Mr. Akazawa is also in DC this week. And so it remains to be seen, but the pace of negotiations is not going so favorably well, and a lot remains to be seen. Domestically, the prime minister is concerned with the rice policy, with fiscal policy, with the election that's coming up, and also this backroom fight about whether he's going to have a double election or not, and the continuing threat of the opposition party through Mr. Nozawa to have a no confidence motion. There's not a lot to complain to the voters about the current prime minister. I mean, there are always things that you can complain about, but there's no one critical issue, no scandal, no money, no girls, no parties that the opposition. Maya, can you turn your computer to mute, please? Thank you. There are no issues going on where people would say, you know, this prime minister, he stinks, we should kick him out. There's always this undercurrent that he's not as good as Mr. Abe or Mr. Suga or Mr. Kishida. There's always that going on, but I don't sense, except for a political motive, let's kick the bum out. We have enough. The opposition parties, they don't have a majority in the lower house, so let's attack them now when they're weak. There's that going on. I just don't think there's enough momentum or a coalescing of forces. The Constitutional Democratic Party, Ishin no Kai, the Democratic, it just doesn't seem like it's going to be there. The structural goal that the prime minister mentioned, he wants GDP, nominal GDP, to go to 1,000 trillion yen per year. And he wants to raise, he mentioned this in the parliament in the diet session earlier this week. He wanted to raise the annual income by 50%. That's pretty aggressive. So what it means when he says, I want to raise the GDP to 1,000 trillion, currently the GDP is at 600,000 trillion, 600 trillion yen per year, and to go to 1,000 trillion by 2040 means sustained growth of 3% per year, which is significantly above the post-1990 average. So we've been in a deflationary period. People know that. The roaring 80s is gone. The wild times of the Japanese yen being so strong for the last 20 years, almost 30 years, the Japanese economy has suffered, and the prime minister is saying, I'm going to have sustained growth 3% per year, and if it's not 3%, then we'll pick it up later. But by 2040, we're going to increase by maybe 40% GDP. And if he keeps on track and it's 3% per year, I guess you could make it. But let me see, about the average income, to raise that to 50%, that's pretty remarkable too. Currently, the average income spread out by all the population, the adults who are working, is 4.5 million yen per year. He wants to boost that to the average income of 6.75 or 7 million yen per year. He intends to do that by insisting on wage hikes and bringing in labor market reforms. He wants to give tax incentives to companies that are increasing their productivity and their pay. He wants to enhance support for women in the workforce and bring in more skilled immigrants into the market. That's going to be a pretty big issue. And all of these pronouncements have been distilled into what is going to be the LDP manifesto for candidates in the lower house. So the lower house has, I'm sorry, for the upper house. So the upper house election will be on July 20th. So there's a lot going on between now and then. The Trump tariffs are supposed to go into effect on July 9th. The elections will be on the 20th. There's potentially a visit by the vice president of the United States, or maybe even the president, on the 9th. That would give this election campaign, which is in full swing at that point in time, a real boost. But the prime minister is really attempting to get the population energized about the LDP and the 50% of the members of the upper house who are running for election. So the upper house has an election every 3 years, 50% run. So the term of the upper house members is 6 years, and half of them run for election every 3 years. So it's not a huge number, but it is very important for the LDP and Komeito to maintain their supremacy in the upper house. They have a majority, a strong majority in the upper house, but as we all know, in the lower house, that's what really controls the disposition of bills and voting, and the prime minister and a lot of different things is really controlled and managed by the lower house. And currently, the LDP is in a deficit. They lack 13 votes to be in a majority, and they have been suffering from that. That is currently why the prime minister is thinking about holding a double election. And the logic there is, even if we do well or if we do poorly in the upper house election, we maintain the majority or we lose the majority. They probably wouldn't lose the majority. But in any event, we still have 3.5 years to suffer through this deficit. We have to negotiate with people. We have to cajole people. We can't pass things through the diet as we normally do, very boisterously, very aggressively. We have the power. We're going to railroad it through. They can't do that. The LDP is unfit, untrained. It doesn't have that kind of memory muscle to do that. They have been in power for so long. This is the first time for them not to have that majority in 30 years, 20 years, more than 20 years. So this is a new thing for them, and they just don't like it. And so the gamble is, even if we win in the upper house, we still have this deficit. So let's take a gamble. Let's run for the election. And maybe in doing that, you know, there are things that you would give up in order to have a robust double election. And that might mean, you know, the president of the United States comes while the campaign is in full swing. That would be a huge boost to the LDP. So keep your eye out for a lot of things that are going on. But in any event, the manifesto is talking about, let's take the, 1,000 trillion yen GDP until 2040. And we're going to boost your income. And also I'm going to give Nimayan 20,000 yen to every adult who is in the country. We're going to give you Nimayan, so like us a little bit more. So he's already talked about that, and trying to get more people energized about the election. Let's see what else is going on. Rice also continues to be an issue. Rice is now being sold in all of the markets. The 2024 rice has already been depleted. 2023, 2022, 2021. The 2020 rice was previously qualified as not quite fit for human consumption, mostly animal feed, and through the Japan Agricultural Association, they usually took that off the market after it's 4 years old. That is now going on the market as well. Many people report that they can't tell that much of a difference. It's much cheaper, and at least there's availability there. So there's the boost that the LDP is getting from the Koizumi appointment as agriculture minister continues. It's probably too early, and it's probably not enough to boost them over the hill. So we have to anticipate the prime minister coming up with other things to sweeten the deal, to make the LDP look better than it maybe is. And one of those bellwethers is how the Tokyo voters act in the current election. So that 9-day campaign started on Friday. You saw the billboards go up. They had a big space, a big white space, and then numbered blocks where you put up the campaign photos of the candidates. Let me see. There are 127 seats. There are 295 candidates that have registered. So registration has closed, and 295 candidates across 42 districts, 42 districts have started their campaign. This on a week from today, that election will occur. So when we give the next briefing, we're not going to have the results in, but the election campaign will have finished. And that night we will have probably 80% or 90% of the results in. This is the highest number of candidates since 1989. So there's a great drive for people to get involved in politics or to run for office. And as you know, the Tokyo governor's election, which occurred about 6 months ago, it had like 50 people signing up to be governor of Tokyo. And that caused a lot of difficulties. They didn't anticipate that, but that's why the billboard space is so large now. And they included that white space just in case somebody came in and they purchased more of those spaces and they ran more candidates and then they sold those spaces to fund their campaigns. They've done that. They advanced plan for that, but it's white space. It's a little bit confusing. But let's see how this whole election campaign comes out. Remember now that 295 candidates means that there are 295 people who have bullhorns who are standing in front of the stations. Each candidate is allowed one campaign car, not two. You can only have one. But you're driving through the same neighborhoods. There might be 7 candidates in a political district, for example, Setagaya-ku or in Shinjuku-ku, that are trying to get people to vote. And in Japan, the best way, the most effective way for people to vote for you is if they don't know you, is just to hear the name over and over again. So when you're driving around in that campaign car, you're just saying the candidate's name over and over. Yoroshiku nagai shimasu. We're for you. We're from this party, but this is my name. And it's as silly as it seems to be somewhat effective. You have sometimes the cars that are crossing each other and they're both trying to overshout each other. There are limits to the decibel levels, especially around hospitals and children's schools, that sort of thing. But it is a pretty dynamic political fight that you can observe just as you're walking through your daily life here in Tokyo. Very interesting. Let me see what else. There are 15 parties, amazingly 15 parties. In the national diet, there are probably 6 formal political parties. Before the election campaign began for the Tokyo Metropolitan, there were maybe 6 or 9, depending on how you count them, political parties. And now they've mushroomed into 15. And you can anticipate that there'll be a lot of movement there. So it's something to watch and something that we'll report on this time next week. Japan condemned Israel for the strikes that were launched on Friday. It's trying to stay somewhat neutral. It urges restraint. I think along with a lot of other countries, people here in Kasumigaseki were a bit surprised at the aggressiveness and that the Israelis took the advantage by launching first. But I think there's a lot of complications and difficulties there. The United States is not wholeheartedly favorable to the Israelis for doing that, but the proof will come out in the pudding. Let's see. It's unlikely to get resolved quicker because of so much damage and destruction that was done by both countries so far. Oil prices have already begun to react. 10% increase just since Friday. So when oil prices increase, Japan typically suffers from that for a lot of different reasons. But let's keep our eye on that, and I will report to you on that, what's happened over the last week, what the prognosis is for the following week, this time next week. So please tune in. The expo in Osaka is a big deal. It's a 6-month exposition for all countries to join in that have pavilions. Not everybody has a pavilion, but the big countries do. They showcase their technology, their products, their services, that sort of thing. And the reason why the Prime Minister has a lot of foreign visitors coming in is because they're coming to attend their country's expo. They spent a lot of money. They've built a pavilion. They have a lot of fanfare there. It's trade and investment, and they can come in and do a lot of trade deals. And obviously, when the president of the country comes in, he wants to see the prime minister. He must see the prime minister. It's part of his duty. So the current prime minister, if you can imagine, he's got a no confidence motion. Is he going to close down the House? The elections are coming up. He's in the Trump tariffs. He's just up to his ears. And many people say Mr. Ishiba just doesn't have the capacity. He doesn't have the stamina to do all of this. And we report on what he's doing diplomatically, how many people visit him every week, in addition to the rice prices and the yen and all of these things. It's just an insanely difficult job. And what he does, what he says, the pronouncements he makes are very important, because although they don't impact us, the people in this audience, the people who are doing business with Japan, or maybe you're in an embassy, you're an ambassador, you're dealing with this, it does have an impact in the short term and in the long term. So it's something that you really need to keep an eye on and continue to follow. And I very much appreciate that you consider this briefing as one of your sources for information. I mean, there are very limited sources of information, reliable information on actually what's going on in Japanese politics and what it means to you. So thank you very much for joining. Also of critical importance, it seems that President Trump did approve, he gave the green light for the U.S. steel deal to go forward. There are a couple of caveats. Those will be coming out in the mix over the next week, but it does look like that's going to move forward. I'm sure that has something to do with the tariff deals and the other things that are going on, as will the yen-dollar ratio and the disparity that's going on there. So all of the things that we talk about, it all makes sense. It all comes together. And this U.S. steel deal is one of those components. It looks like that is one of the things that got the thumbs up, thereby allowing other things that were difficult for the Japanese to swallow to maybe relinquish and to back off a little bit. So I anticipate a trade deal. I don't anticipate it in Canada, but I think before the 9th, when the Trump tariffs actually go into effect, there will be a deal, and there'll be a lot of fanfare about that. Everybody will be very delighted, and then they'll vote for the LDP when the upper house elections come. It's going to be a little bit early for the Tokyo elections, but I think on a national basis, it's the upper house elections that really are going to benefit from the LDP showcasing their prowess in diplomacy, in U.S. trade, in the amount of GDP that is going to be increased, how much the salaries are increasing for the voters, and that sort of thing. So with that, I'd like to wrap it up and move on to the Q&A period. You've got some Q&A prepared for us, Maya?
Yes, there are quite a few questions actually that came in earlier this morning. Some of them came in last night. So thank you very much for this. And let me move to the questions we've got. The first one comes from Hiroko-san, and she says, how does the finalized merger between US Steel and Nippon Steel impact the Trump administration's tariffs on Japanese steel and aluminum imports?
Okay, one of the things that's not on the boards, steel and aluminum have a 25% tariff, and that's supposed to be different from, that's supposed to be different from the other tariffs for automobiles and also for other products. So automobiles are at 25%, other goods and services are at 24%, and then steel and aluminum are at a separate issue. So the U.S. steel trade deal, yes, will definitely impact that, because putting tariffs on that is going to be like cutting off part of your nose if the United States and Japan has a U.S. steel, Nippon Steel trade deal. So, but it also has a larger impact on tariffs in general. So I think it's one of those benefits that the Japanese are going to receive in exchange for relinquishing something else. So a lot of things are in motion now. And if you're living in Japan, and maybe even if you're not living in Japan, you have noticed the tension in the market. People are just not being aggressive. They're not addressing business because everybody's in a kind of wait and see posture. You're not seeing the vibrancy of emails and social media. People aren't interacting as vigorously as possible because people just don't know what to do and what's going to happen. This rain is coming in. Um,
Don't melt. Don't melt.
well, you can tell it is a little bit moist here in the cabin of Grimm's. So yes, U.S. trade. The steel deal is a big deal for the Japanese. I think it's also a big deal for United States steel workers too, and to bring in more and higher technology. The United States wants to increase their shipbuilding prowess. That requires steel, and also high-end steel, which almost always comes from Japan. They want to merge those together, and the United States wants to be on top of the trade deal in terms of oil production, in terms of steel production, in terms of bringing manufacturing back home, and that means basically steel. So back to you, Mike.
Right. And I think that there was a question a couple of weeks ago, again, in addition to this about the tariffs. So how likely is it that Japan will use, let's say, the amount of governmental bonds it holds, American government bonds, as a token in these
Yeah,
negotiations?
as a kind of trade fulcrum,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah.
that has been raised a couple of times.
Hmm.
If you're the American negotiator, you're worried because the Japanese, they don't hold the number one. The British came in and they now hold the number one amount of bonds of the United States. It used to be the Japanese, and a tremendous amount of money was held by the bond market. And the Minister of Finance said, this is separate from the trade deals. We have a surplus with the United States. We're holding U.S. Treasury bonds. We use that to fluctuate the yen-dollar ratio to manage that. We don't use this as a trade tool, so don't worry about it. But people are, they look beyond that and they say, of course it's a trade tool. You can use it at any time without cost or without repercussion. You're holding the money of the United States, and they're getting the benefit from it, and so it's easy for you to leverage that. But publicly, they say we're not doing that. The trade stands different from the U.S. bond and how much U.S. money the Japanese hold. So let's wait and see.
Right.
And if it is used, it's probably very quiet. You're not going to read much about it. That's why we read very carefully what is being said by the Bank of Japan in their monthly meetings, because they do need to report it. When they report, we catch it, but that's because they're reporting to the politicians, they're reporting to the prime minister, and those are public pronouncements. So we get to see that as well.
Well, and there is also, there are rumors, I believe, that, the administration of President Trump will actually postpone the deadline for the ends of the negotiations, tariff negotiations, right, for certain countries. And I also wonder, so because we know that there might be a double election here, how are these two things, if the deadline for negotiations is postponed and if there is a double election here, what do you think? How do you think these two events are going to, impact the
Okay.
Japanese economy and also, let's say, the negotiations as well?
I think it would be seen as a failure by the United States and by the Japanese if there's not a deal that's made before July 9th. I think the implications of that, and in fact, the Japanese are being, they're holding the line. They're not being a pushover. They're really negotiating on behalf of the Japanese, on the behalf of the Japanese automobile manufacturers. And they're not really giving everything that, they didn't come in immediately. Mr. Trump and his negotiators said, for those that come in quick, you get a good deal. If you wait, if you negotiate, if you take a long time, it might be a little bit difficult. One of the reasons for the Trump tariffs was Japan. It's the rest of the world too, but one of the main drivers was this trade imbalance between the United States and Japan. And I think pushing that off for a later date, it's one of the critical ones. Britain, Canada, Japan were central to the trade negotiations to end in that Trump pause. And so I think they need to meet the deadlines there. They could push it off, but I think it would not be a good political move. With regard to the double election, the prime minister has to decide this week. If there's a no confidence motion, that must be submitted while the Diet is in session. The session ends a week from today. So that means basically on Friday. It could be Saturday and Sunday, but most of the time, the members of the parliament travel home over the weekends. Unlikely that they would stay, but they could if it's an emergency for a no confidence motion. Similarly, the prime minister can close down the House, but in order to do that, the Diet needs to be in session. So when, for example, if there's a summer recess, and the prime minister decides, I'm going to close down the House, God damn it, I hate these guys, he actually has to call an extraordinary session. So everybody comes back to Tokyo, and then they have an extraordinary session for him to close down the House. So people have a little bit of a heads up if they're on vacation and the prime minister has decided to have a extraordinary Diet session, then you know something's in the air. So it's more likely not to have an extraordinary Diet session to close down the House at his whim, and he can do that. He can do that, even though the Diet session ends a week from today, he could do it before the election and thereby have a double election, but he's got a very brief time period there too. If it's going to be a no confidence motion, that must be submitted this week. If it's going to be the prime minister closing down the House on his own volition, he can do that. He has a little bit more flexibility. It's a little bit logistically difficult. The best time to do that would be this week. So this week is really important, whether there's going to be a double election or not. And if I can anticipate your next question, I don't anticipate there being a double election, although it makes a lot of sense. If you're the LDP and you hate the fact that you are missing 13 seats to have a majority, and you hate it, you hate discussing with these guys and talking to them and negotiating with them. It's so, gosh, it's infuriating. I wish we had the majority. You might take that gamble. Let's talk about it next week.
Okay, let's talk about this next week. And moving on to the next questions from Byron Johnston, we have two. The first one is, Japan is going or has already resumed oil purchases from Russia. Any insight on how that decision was made?
I didn't know that, Byron, so thank you for that information. I guess it is just, supply chain security. The Japanese are required to have a diversification of sources. It is somewhat distasteful at this particular time with Ukraine, Russia going at it like that. Diplomatically, there is stuff going on between Japan and and Russia. The Sakhalin 1 and Sakhalin 2, the LNG production there. Japan is a part of that. They are importing LNG. I guess it's just one step beyond that to include oil in it, but the oil isn't coming from Sakhalin, which is a disputed territory. The Japanese and the Russians still contest who owns that land. And because of those islands being occupied by Russia since the end of World War II, there is no peace treaty between Japan and Russia, even today. So Shinzo Abe, as you might recall, was really front and center about resolving that issue, getting some of those islands returned to Japan, and signing a peace treaty between Japan and Russia. He and Putin, he spent 27 meetings with Putin during the time that he was prime minister. It wasn't resolved, and it's unlikely to be resolved. So this news that they're now importing oil from Russia is, I'm going to look into that, and I'll give you a little bit more insight from my sources next week. But thanks for the insight, Byron.
Yes, thank you. And the second question is, it is inconceivable that Mrs. Akie Abe went to Russia without consulting the top brass of the LDP. What might be the expectation from that top brass in terms of thawing with Russia as the war gradually winds down?
That's a great observation, and you're absolutely accurate. It is inconceivable that she would have gone on her own volition, didn't tell anybody. Of course, she's going to tell people. She's going to be in direct communication. She's going to get support from the government to do that, but she's going as a private citizen. That's why the President Putin accepted her, because she's coming as a private citizen. She was the wife of my good friend Shinzo, and of course, I'm going to meet her. maybe we'll have dinner. Maybe she'll join some event, but I'm going to give her some flowers and we're going to talk. And sometimes when you send an emissary like that, I've been involved in that sort of thing on many instances for the U.S. government, for other governments, where they send in an emissary. It's not somebody from the government. It's somebody like the CEO of one of the major companies. They come in and they request a meeting with the prime minister. I've been asked on several occasions to do that. They're actually carrying a message. They're carrying a message for their company. Please increase your imports. Please do this and that because my company is suffering from it. But also, before I came here, I had a 20-minute meeting with the president of the United States, and he's asked me to convey to you. So they do have these secondary sources. U.S. embassies play a significant role in that. Sometimes what's going on in the embassy and what's going on in the White House or in the capital of the country is a little bit different. Not always does the president or the prime minister have full control over the messages that are being sent. Sometimes he wants a different message that's being sent. And also, the person that's carrying that message gets a lot of benefit from being that emissary. So there's a lot that's going on there. But yes, definitely, as you've observed, the Japanese government was well aware of that, and probably, the Japanese government at this particular point in time is a little bit reluctant to open a channel to Russia during this spat with the United States and, President Trump trying to negotiate a deal. Don't complicate things. But yes, it would be a great deal if the president and the prime minister could meet at some point in time. Can we begin talking about that? Can I bring you some more Akita dogs and that sort of thing?
Right. Okay. Thank you for this. And it looks like these are the questions for today. We will continue with more next week again. And to everybody who watched this recording, thank you very much for coming back. And thank you very much for your patience. We appreciate it. And if you are still here, please let us know that you have watched. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit follow if you haven't done that yet. This was Japan Expert Insights podcast on Japanese politics. The name is Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire, the longest standing government relations and public policy consulting firm here in Tokyo, and me, Maya Matsuoka, as a host. So thanks a lot for this. Have a great week, and we'll see you once again on Sunday next week at 8:20, when hopefully there will be no storms and no winds wherever Timothy is at that time. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks, everybody. See you next